Good morning and welcome to Bible Time. Hope everybody's doing well this morning. We are getting ready to get started into yet another of the Ten Commandments. Today's topic will be stealing. Thou shalt not steal. And so we're going to start with some table discussion of our opening question. What did I miss? Oh, everybody started laughing at me. I was like, what's going on? You can guess from the image who will be teaching today. It is our resident baseball expert, Rocky Feemster. So, yes. And so our question today for table discussion to open is, discuss these scenarios. I think there's an S there. Robbing a bank, forgetting some income on your tax return, being consistently late to work, tapping into your neighbor's water line when he is on vacation. Although consequences of these are clearly different, is there any moral difference? And then rank these in terms of how bad they are. So rank these from bad to good. So take a few minutes among yourselves to discuss as a table, and then Rocky will lead us in teaching here shortly.
I hope you all have had some good discussion at your table. First, I want to ask, has anyone in the room confessed to bank robbery today? Well, okay, not. What about being consistently late to work? Anybody have that issue? Well, I hope you saw the purpose of the discussion, which was to kind of go over some particular areas in which the concept of theft or stealing might exist, and to see how it applies and what we think about it. And I think our table was probably going to be like everybody else's. We kind of thought stuff like robbing a bank was worse than being late to work. And the income tax and stealing the neighbor's water and all of that, well, how much are we talking about? Are we talking about forgetting to report $200 or $2 million? Which one is it, right? And so we make a judgment in our society and in our culture based on the size of the offense. Whereas we're going to see today in reading the scriptures that that's not necessarily how God makes the judgment, okay? So we'll take a look at that. So, thou shalt not steal. This is a picture of Yadier Molina, a Hall of Fame level catcher with the Cardinals for many years, who was very adept at throwing out runners. It is legal to steal bases in baseball. You can steal a base. What's the next one? That's a t-shirt. I actually have that t-shirt. That's not a picture of mine, but I have that t-shirt. Thou shalt steal. It is legal to steal bases in baseball. It is also legal to steal signs, unless you get really good at it, and then they try to punish you for that, but that's a different subject. Yeah, well, I knew I'd get a reaction with that. So what is the commandment? Let's take a look. The next one here. Do not steal. Exodus 20:15. I'm not sure why I left the 15 off, but Exodus 20:15. Thou shalt not steal. Do not steal. You shall not steal. There are different translations, but guess what? They all come out exactly the same. A very short, pithy, to the point commandment. Don't steal. Everyone knows this one, okay? And everyone agrees with it, at least when you apply it to someone else, right? Everybody agrees that this commandment is a good one and people should not steal. The word steal is defined in the dictionary as taking another person's property without permission or legal right and without intending to return it, or dishonestly pass off another person's ideas as your own. Taking something that belongs to someone else and does not belong to you. Can we all agree in the room that you learned this in kindergarten, if not before? All of us. In our children's department this morning, in the kindergarten and preschool classes, I will guarantee you that one of the kids, and I'm not naming names because I don't even know who, they all do it. One of the kids will take a toy away from somebody else when they're playing with it. And whoever's in there monitoring the children and teaching the children will say, now wait a minute, we don't take things that other people have. You learn this at a very early age, and everybody agrees with it. Do not steal, thou shalt not steal. But the definition in the Bible is much broader than what many people think. The Bible uses the word, in Hebrew, which is the Old Testament, the word ganab is used. It's used 39 times in the Old Testament, and it's used in the following ways. First, to thieve, either literally or figuratively. To deceive or carry away, and to secretly obtain via stealth. Those are the three ways in which the word ganab is used in the Old Testament. And in the New Testament, the word klepto is used, as you can imagine, where we get our word a kleptomaniac. What's a kleptomaniac? Somebody who likes to take stuff that doesn't belong to them. So let's go to the next slide. I'm not going to go through all of these verses, but you can see the word ganab used in different ways in these various verses. In Genesis 44:8, Exodus 22, Leviticus 19, Matthew 6, Matthew 27, John 10, Romans 2, Ephesians 4, it's taking without permission. In Leviticus 19:11 is an example of how it's deceit or dishonesty, tricking someone. And in Genesis 31, 2 Samuel 19, and Job 27, it's doing something in secret. So all of those things involve stealing in the Old Testament. So let's talk about it. And I'm sure you had this conversation at your table this morning. You probably had this, talking about, well, why was someone late to work every day? Was it because it was a single mom who had to, deal with 4 kids and was struggling, and maybe they stayed late every day, or maybe they worked from home, or, all kinds of caveats on it. And all of those could be true and all could exist. I freely acknowledge that. So we want to look at the attitude that people have about theft in our society and culture today, and which has affected your own opinions and your own views on it. Let's take a look. Justified theft. One thing you hear is, well, no one will miss it. It's a small amount. There was a movie that came out, 15, 20 years ago, and some of you may be familiar with it. It was called, I think it was Office Space. I think that was the name of it. And there was a scheme. There was 3 guys who worked in an IT type environment up in Richardson, Texas. It was filmed here in Dallas area. And what was the name of that company? Who can remember that? I can't remember. Anyway, they had soul-stealing, mind-crushing jobs, okay? And so they decided to hatch a little plot. There were all kinds of financial transactions that the company would do, and these would be carried out to the thousandth of a cent, right? And so this money would change places, and then they would just write off the additional. So what they did was they figured out a program to put into the system where they could steal that 1,000th of a cent on every transaction that went through the computers. And why did they do it? Well, there was a couple of reasons. One, because it was such a small amount, no one will ever know. And another reason they did it was because they frankly hated their jobs and they wanted to get even with their bosses. Yeah, right. That guy, was his name Lunderberg or whatever it was? Lundberg, yeah. I'm going to have to ask you to not do that, whatever it was. The guy was aggravating just watching him on the movie. And so they put the plan into action, and it, virtually overnight comes up to $300,000, and they realize that they're going to be hosed if they don't be careful about it. So you do it because, hey, it's a small amount, and it won't make any difference to anyone. What difference does it make, right? That's one in justification. Another one is it's, kind of you're involved in kind of a shady deal, and your justification is, well, it's just business. Don't take it personal. It's just business, okay? And so I got the advantage over somebody, and yeah, he was a fool, He dealt with me, and I didn't tell him everything he probably should have known, but it's his own fault. This kind of justification. Another one is your employer, okay? You're not paid enough. I'm not paid enough. I work harder than they pay me. They don't honor me as an employee. I can take office supplies home. It's a perk of the job. This kind of attitude. And by the way, we have pens on the table, and if any of you want to take them, go ahead, okay? It's okay. Now, if you load all of them up and put them in, that would be a little bit questionable, but anyway. What about necessity? I need it more than they do. This is one. It even came up at our table. Why is somebody robbing a bank? Is their family destitute or something? Is that the reason? That's rarely the reason. I'm not saying it never is, but when somebody robs a bank, it's not normally that. It's we have a miscreant who, what was the word Willie Sutton said? How come you rob banks? He says, because that's where the money is, There's another, I quote from movies too often, but, Raising Arizona, the criminals in that movie, they made a practice of robbing the corner grocery. And one of them was arguing with the other one and telling them they should rob a bank instead of the 7-Eleven because the sun doesn't rise and set on the corner grocery. So you go where the money is, and rarely it's because of some financial necessity, but I guess it could be. There's a very sad story, and this happened about 20 years ago, of a lawyer in Dallas who, in the course of handling a case, he got some money which was supposed to be escrowed, and he didn't escrow it. And he ended up spending it over a period of time, and then when it came time to make an accounting, he didn't have it. It was like $10,000. So what did he do? You'd think somebody who deals with the law would know better, but what did he do? He went and robbed a bank. And he got caught, and he's still in prison today, I think, over it. A terrible story. Necessity. You know, there's a story, and this may be apocryphal, but many of you are familiar with the name Fiorello LaGuardia. He used to be the mayor of New York back in the 30s. And in New York City, the mayor had, I don't know if they still do, had the right to serve in the municipal courts. And so he would frequently serve in the municipal court. And there's the story about how a grandmother came in and was caught by a baker stealing bread from the bakery. And he asked her, "Why are you doing this?" And she said, "I have no income. My son has died. I need to feed my grandchildren. This is why I did it. I need to feed my grandchildren." And LaGuardia's answer was, "Well, you know, you stole, and the law's the law. You're fined $10. And then he fined everybody else in the courtroom 50 cents for living in a city where a grandmother had to steal bread for her children. Now, and they allegedly raised $50 or something like, which was a princely sum in those days, and gave it to a woman. Now, I don't know whether that's a true story or not, but that's that principle that you're doing it because you have to. It's necessary. And then we saw this sort of in, the movie that I was talking about, Office Space, getting even with someone. In that case, they were getting even with their employer. I'll show them. You know, not one of the great events of my life, but I still remember when I was in elementary school, there was a kid in the class who was kind of a bully, and he was a lot bigger than everybody else, including me, and in some cases he was bigger than two of us put together. But anyway, he was pushing people around, and so I can remember one day I stole his toy car, and I actually destroyed it. It's not like I played it with it myself. Well, I got even with him. And so that kind of attitude is used sometimes. Well, let's see what the scriptures have to say about that. People do not despise, this is Proverbs 6, people do not despise a thief if he steals to justify his appetite when he is hungry. But if he is caught, he will pay sevenfold. He will give all the goods of his house. In Ephesians 4, let the thief no longer steal, but rather let him labor doing honest work with his own hands, so that he may have something to share with anyone in need. Proverbs 10, treasures gained by wickedness do not profit, but righteousness delivers from death. Next slide. Leviticus 6, if anyone sins and commits a breach of faith against the Lord by deceiving his neighbor, this is one of the use of that term of ganab, deceiving his neighbor in a matter of deposit or security or through robbery, or if he has oppressed his neighbor, he will be punished. A false balance is an abomination to the Lord, but a just weight is his delight. Proverbs 11, don't cheat someone in a business deal. Bread gained by deceit is sweet to a man, but afterward his mouth will be full of gravel. Proverbs 20. 1 Corinthians 6, and there's a list of sins that Paul is going over, and one of them, nor thieves will inherit the kingdom of God. We see in the Bible, and there are many other verses, I just picked out a few. We see in the Bible that there is no just cause for violating this commandment. This commandment is not limited. There's no limiting principle on this command about cause or amount or reasons or any of that. It's as plain as it could be. Do not steal. Do not thieve. Do not carry away by deception. Do not do something under a cover of darkness. Don't do it. It's as clear as it can be. And here's the other thing, the next one. It is not limited to stuff. We think about, and even the modern definition of stealing is taking somebody else's property. That's not the biblical definition, okay? The penalty for stealing stuff was remittance of whatever you took plus something extra. You remember the story about Zacchaeus. When Zacchaeus was saved by Christ and went to the banquet, what did he say? If I have cheated anyone, I will pay them back fourfold. And we see in the Bible various points in time, we see where you had to pay back what you took plus something else, a fine, if you will, or a bonus or whatever to the person you wronged. But there are scriptures in the Old Testament related to stealing a person. Now, we need to talk for just a moment about the application of this. A lot of people, and you probably have heard this before, a lot of people who don't like the Bible or don't want to be bound by the Bible will use this excuse. Well, the Bible endorses slavery, and everybody knows that's wrong. Well, I'm not going to get into the semantics of all of that, but my position is the Bible does not endorse slavery. It reports slavery, which is a different thing. But it also talks about slavery in a different context. And the context in which the Bible talks about slavery was one of two circumstances. One in which you conquered a people and they became your servants because you conquered them in war, in battle. And the second was indentured servitude, where somebody actually sold themselves into slavery so that they could work off a debt. And I don't want to get into all the weeds on this, but there were all kinds of laws and principles relating to slavery. If there was a Hebrew slave, for example, who was an indentured servant, you had to set him free after 6 years of service in the 7th year. You had to set all slaves free in the year of Jubilee. So if you got a slave in the 48th year, guess what? 2 years later, you had to set them free. That was what was talked about. And I'm not endorsing that form of slavery either. What we as Americans today think about in history, we think about a form of chattel slavery, which is just a horrendous stain on the history of this country and the world in general. Chattel slavery was different. That's what you think of when the African slave trade or the Arab slave traders who would go in the Barbary pirates who would go up into Italy and the Mediterranean islands and kidnap people and make slaves of them. And we see it even today in the issue of sex slavery, where young women, particularly in Asian countries, are taken either by deception or against their will and put into sex markets. We see that today as a form of slavery. That's completely different than what was talked about in the Bible, and that is 100% wrong according to the Bible. The Bible says in Exodus chapter 21:16 and in Deuteronomy 24:7, if you steal a person to sell them into slavery, that is punishable by death. This idea that the Bible endorses slavery is completely wrong. And what does it tell us? It tells us that this command applies to kidnapping people and stealing people and holding them against their will. That it also applies to that. It's not just taking people's stuff. God opposes, next slide, God opposes stealing men because that's the work of Satan. That's what Satan does. And we see that in John chapter 10, the story of the Good Shepherd. He talks about, I take care of my sheep. And the thieves try to break in and take them away. He's talking about Satan. And we also see it in the context of Luke chapter 8, the parable of the sower. What is that story? The seed is thrown out. And what happens, at least in one occasion? Satan comes and takes it away. He's talking about Satan, who steals people's opportunity to know God and be saved. And that's why God opposes stealing men, kidnapping, putting people in indenture, in slavery. God's opposed to that. Well, let's move on. There are other kinds of theft which are covered by this definition in the Bible. One is stealing dignity, humiliation of people. And some of you are very good at humiliating other people. I'm not going to name names, but I'll just tell you this morning I was in the restroom and I got out of the shower and I came and I stood in front of the mirror and my wife's at the other sink. And I'm looking in the mirror and I said to my wife, I said, I see a fat, dumpy, ugly old man. I really need a compliment right now. And my wife says to me, well, your eyesight is perfect. And then she says, and you forgot balding. Humiliating someone else is stealing their dignity. Now, look, I'll just be honest, it didn't really happen, although that's what she thinks, okay? But that's an example. You can humiliate someone, and a little bit of fun repartee is fine, but if you're humiliating people in your attitude and your demeanor and your speech, you are stealing their dignity. What about stealing trust, tricking someone? And this is very common. I've used the example here of tricking someone into buying and making an unnecessary purchase, spending their money. The elderly people in our society are very, very are targets for this sort of thing. People call them on the phone and get them to spend money on something that they do not need and which has no value. Happens all the time. I've also used the example of a Lothario or a black widow. And what's a Lothario? I don't know what that is, but Lothario is a man who, in his relationships with women, is scheming and conniving. He basically inserts himself into their life so that he can get all their money. And a black widow is the same. Marries a rich man, bumps him off, and gets all the money. This kind of thing is stealing a person by using trust. You can steal ideas, plagiarism, using somebody's, and by the way, those pictures that I put up here, I have to tell you, I was particularly careful on this presentation to make sure those weren't copyrighted. I wanted to make sure before I put them up there, right? But you steal somebody's idea or you steal somebody's words, plagiarism. They have all kinds of programs in college now. I've read this the other day in an article where they have they put kids' papers into this program, and it apparently checks every source ever known to man. It determines whether or not they plagiarized anything, which is interesting. If you steal somebody's words, that's plagiarism. If you go do a lot of looking and you steal 35 or 100 people's words, that's research, right? It's different, right? But just stealing someone else's idea, that's a form of theft. What about stealing a reputation by gossip or falsehoods? Did you hear the one about? Did you hear? Did you know? Gossip. Gossip is, I won't say it's the worst issue to occur in a New Testament church, but it's up there. Must be careful about gossip. What about stealing time? Our joy, our peace. If you're late to work every day, maybe you make it up by working later, but you know what? Your boss has hours of business, and, maybe the calls all come in the morning. There's just an issue there if you steal time from your boss. What about stealing someone's joy or peace? Some people are really good at this. You have a really good event, and they want to immediately tell you what's the bad side, okay? Every silver lining has a cloud, right? They're after you as soon as they can get. What about the next one? What about stealing from God himself? I'm going to quote from Malachi 4:8. Will man rob God? Yet you are robbing me. But you say, how have we robbed you? In your tithes and contributions. You are cursed with a curse, for you are robbing me, the whole nation of you. Bring the full tithe to the storehouse, that there may be food in my house. Now, that was the Old Testament. We were under the Jews, the Hebrews were under the requirement for tithing. And Jesus has expanded that commandment now. We are to give cheerfully, and we're to give sacrificially. And I'm not up here to say, although I personally believe in tithing, I'm not up here to say that every Christian has. I'm not saying that. But I am saying that if you are not giving of your time, your energy, your efforts, and your finances to God, then the scriptures say you are robbing God. That's stealing. Okay, let's go to the next one. If you truly understand how broad this commandment is, you follow it faithfully, you find that you'll be following all the others as well, if you think about it, right? The first 4 commandments are about loyalty and worship to God. I am the Lord your God. no other gods, no idols. Don't take his name in vain. Remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. All of those are about man's relationship with God. And if you don't honor God, if you have idols in your life, you are stealing the worship and adoration and devotion that God is entitled to, that belongs to him. And then the last commandments, the last 6, deal with people's relationship with each other. Honor your parents, and don't murder, and don't commit adultery, and don't steal, and don't make false statements against people, and don't covet. All of those relate to our relationship with each other. And each one of those involves an element of theft. If you don't honor your parents, you're stealing the required honor that is due to them. If you take someone's life, you are stealing their life. If you get involved in an adulterous relationship, you are stealing the intimate relationship that these other married people have. If you steal property, you're stealing property. If you lie about someone to get some advantage against them, you are stealing their dignity or their reputation or their ability to provide for themselves. And if you covet, that's a desire to steal, isn't it? That's a desire to have what someone else has. If you actually follow this command, you're pretty much on your way to obeying all of them. If you understand the full significance about what it means in the Bible to say, do not steal. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. These are the 2 commandments. Jesus was asked, what are the greatest commandments? This was his answer. These are the 2. He said, love the Lord your God with your heart, soul, and mind. And the second is likened to the first. Love your neighbor as yourself. And if you are stealing, you're not doing either one of those. And if you're obedient to these 2, you won't be stealing. Love your neighbor as yourself. Do not steal. All right, discussion. Let's revisit the opening question. Is your understanding or attitude about these any different? Add some discussion about giving God his due, finances, worship, and deference. What's the ranking now? And then, is any part of the urge to steal a result of dissatisfaction with what God has provided? What righteousness is expected from the 8th commandment? How do the 2 commandments that Jesus shared bear on this? And then somebody read Matthew 15:19 and discuss how theft begins in the heart. Thank you all.